Summit Tunnel is the crowning achievement, or one of the crowning achievements, for the Chinese in the construction of the railroad. They worked for well over a year, close to 2 years, drilling this tunnel, sometimes recording progress of only inches per day.
In order to excavate the 15 downer tunnels totaling 1,600 feet, the Chinese worked rotated shifts days and nights. They did not have advanced machinery and they could not use black explosives on granites. They used nitroglycerin, a highly explosive substance, to blow off the granite. Residues scattered everywhere, which led to many casualties. Supervisor Strobridge lost an eye to explosions. This was the most difficult section for Central Pacific Railroad Company. Here, the Chinese laborers also passed 2 severely cold winters.
One of the most grueling experience was during the winter of 1866 and 1867. Extremely bad cold weather. Okay, and if you drive up into the Sierras during the winter, and you go skiing and having fun, yeah, but you think of the Chinese laborers in the winter, what they had to do. They worked through the night, even in different shifts, under the snow with with the snow sheds, and they just continue to work all winter long.
Imagine how difficult it was for these workers from Guangdong province to spend months working with their feet soaked under the snow. According to Dutch Flat Inquirer's report in 1866, avalanches buried many tents of the Chinese workers while they were asleep. It was never determined exactly how many Chinese laborers were killed during the railroad constructions.
I think 2 things. I think number 1, my gut tells me it's probably high. But the other thing is my historical knowledge tells me nobody has any real solid idea of how many people were killed, because nobody's done a systematic study that really looks at it, because the evidence is so sparse. There's so little evidence. And I'm talking white workers as well as Chinese.
That there is one newspaper article talked about a shipment of 20,000 pounds of bones. I don't know if you came across that, from the railroad area to Sacramento, then to be sent back to China. So we know that at least at this high point, probably about 12 to 14,000 Chinese worked on the railroad. 20,000 pounds of bones probably amount to about 1,200 people. So at least a 10% loss of life. I'm sure there's more.
My gut also tells me that probably more workers working on the Union Pacific died than workers working on the Central Pacific. And there's a couple of reasons for that. For one thing, the towns along the Union Pacific during construction were known as hell on wheels, full of gambling and drinking, and they were famous for the number of deaths per night of workers from fighting and things like that. The Central Pacific did not allow such towns to exist along their railroad during construction.
Compared to the Irish workers, the Chinese workers had better eating and living habits.
The food for the Chinese was quite good, because the Chinese, first of all,
they cook
for themselves, and then they're not going to work eating meat and potatoes or beans, and they're not going to eat, pork and beans. They cannot. They will not. They wanted their own food, and also they boiled their water for tea. So they had no dysentery. The white workers on the Union Pacific coming from the east, they suffered such bouts of dysentery because they drank the water from the river. The Chinese always boiled their water.
After a day of work, the Chinese workers would clean their bodies. They carried tea and whiskey bottles. This habit saved them from catching infectious diseases. Back then, the Chinese laborers were all contracted by the Central Pacific Railroad Company. The Americans called it coolie trade.
He was paid at the beginning about, let's say, $26 a month. But the $26 a month, they're working from sunrise to sunset. I mean, there's something like 12 hours a day that they're working for $26 a month, or about $1 a day. But that isn't their total net pay, because the food was deducted from them. So by the time the food was deducted from them, they're probably earning more like $25 to $20 a month. And compared to the white workers, they were paid something like $35 a month, including board, in other words, including the meals.
$1 a day was a lot to the Chinese workers. After paying for food, they sent the rest of the money back home to Guangdong. Historian Connie Yu recalled the history recited by her mother about her great-grandfather.
While he was working on the railroad, you know, he was paid $1 a day. This is when he was first the early laborer. He was paid $1 a day, and he accumulated enough for a $20 gold piece. And he kept that for luck. He kept it with him. He kept it in a little bag, tied around his waist. And one night he went to the latrine up in the Sierras. He lost the coin. And he said he cried for a month, because he told his children and grandchildren. So you know this kind of story is true.
In the summer of 1867, the owner of Central Pacific Railroad, Leland Stanford, was short on cash and was on the verge of bankruptcy. He defaulted on the payments to workers, then something incredible happened.
But it's the first largest strike of its kind in American history. And to strike at that point in time was illegal. You could have been shot for going on strike. There's no law to protect you.
Oh, I've been working on the railroad all the long.
The Chinese worked 6 days a week and 24-hour shifts per day. They worked more, but was paid less than their Caucasian counterparts. They finally went on strike.
How this railroad relates to Asians in America, or Chinese American in the law. There's a general stereotype that Chinese are very passive. All right? They're very quiet. And so here's an example where these Chinese are not passive. They take control of their lives. They say no. Right? They certainly don't speak English, but they can pass the word around from camp to camp to camp to camp. And eventually it's the largest strike, close to 2,000 workers going on strike at various camps.
At that time, the food for Chinese laborers were transported from Sacramento. The management team had cut off the food supply, forcing the Chinese workers to end the strike.
They struck for higher wages. I think it took about, they struck for 7 days. And all through the whole line, the work stopped. Right through the Sierras, everything stopped for 7 days. But the company tried to break the strike by not giving them food. And so the Chinese finally gave up. But without any explanation, though, the next payroll came, the Chinese wages increased.